Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your girl Mitzi, and this is Mitzi. Let's think about it. Today, we are thinking about disabilities. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that's a thinker because that is something that we need to think about. So, luckily for me, I have a special guest here, Timothy, who is going to help me think about this in another manner so that we all can think about this. So, Timothy, I have to ask you straight away. Let's rip off that band aid. What does disability make you think about?
That's a great question. Well, I think so. I'm a psychiatrist, so I think about thinking all the time.
I love
And
speaking to you guys.
so the standard way we tend to, I say, a lot of people think about disability is there's a person, there's a barrier, and they have to get over it, right? And how do we accommodate? But I think a better way to think about disability is we all start from somewhere. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we all have goals that we need to accomplish together. And so I think getting past when possible the idea of overcoming barrier is a helpful way to think about disability.
That's a good way. That is a good way because some people do. I mean, if I'm really thinking about it, that is true. We think that there is a barrier that's stopping them from being just like anybody else, but in reality, it doesn't necessarily work like that. That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. And I think the notion, I mean, folks with disabilities, it's obvious. Like I think the more I live, the more I talk to people, everybody's dealing with something. You see me and my seeing eye dog out there, one thing I'm dealing with. But we all have our challenges. And, with folks with disabilities, they're maybe a bit more obvious.
Yeah, that's true because you're just living your life as anybody else is living your life. You don't recognize it until somebody points it out, and then it's like, oh, okay. I mean, is it considered rude when somebody points it out?
See,
Because I would.
yeah, well, let's give a perfect example. Just before we started, right? You said, "Hey, if you don't want to use your camera, that's fine with me," because you were trying to be accommodating and kind, and which is wonderful. But the truth was, I just didn't know my computer camera was on. So
Yeah.
so that's a perfect example. So I think non-judgmental curiosity. Most people react very well to that. Sincere questions. I've gotten to share. I was just thinking the other day when I was in medical school, one of the neurosurgical residents, so they're smart folks, asked me if I left my seeing eye dog at the hospital overnight when I went home. And that's, what? That's kind
Yeah.
of right. But they asked the question, and whenever somebody asks a question, it seems to imply they're ready to learn. And if they're ready to learn, I'll try to teach them.
That's a good way to see it. That is a very valid way to see it. And I think I wish more people just walks around life with that perspective, which is instead of seeing a question as an attack or as a belittlement, see it as a way to educate because there are real people out there like myself who don't know everything.
Mhm.
And we just want to know so that we can think about it because like you said earlier, psychiatrists, all they do is think about things.
Yeah.
And I just spoke with a psychiatrist earlier today, and it's beautiful how your all minds are different compared to the common folks because you can tell the difference between just characteristics of a personality trait just as the person is, and then you could tell the difference of when that person is sincerely embodied of who they are. And for you, since you are able to do this, um do you have a way of dealing with the differences
The difference is in how
in
somebody,
people? Yeah, in the differences of people.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. I really just, so there's a tendency in psychiatry and in a lot of places to define normal and then everything else is bad. And I try to loosen up my sense of normal and say, well, what's working for you? What's going on in your life? And in order to do that, I have to understand you adequately enough to work with you and think in those terms. So I try to, thinking about somebody's embodiment and their, where they are, it has to come from that same non-judgmental curiosity place.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a valid point. And I guess I have to ask, do you think disabilities, mental disabilities have a harder time of being accepted or acknowledged in the world versus visual disabilities that you can actually see?
I think. yeah, so I think when people's disability is with how they think, um, there's that extra layer that people around have to say to themselves, I wonder why they're doing that. But you see somebody walking around with a white cane or in a wheelchair, you know. And so I think it does take a little more intuition or patience in other people's to pause and say, boy, I wonder what's going on here. And the other part of that is we're so used to, I think, life moves so fast, taking things personally and just
Yeah,
realizing when somebody acts a certain way, chances are it's not about you. It's most likely
that's
about them, and that puts us in a good spot.
that is very true. And I'm curious because I had another disabled person on my show before, and it's funny how he said that his parents never enabled them and never enabled him to or coddled him for his disability because he couldn't walk and he didn't really have legs. Um and they always treated him like a normal human being, and he felt like that really helped him. Do you think that's true for anybody who has disabilities, that it's better to just treat them as normal versus enable them and always try to help them out if you see that they need or that they have that disability?
I think in general, yeah. So I had two older sisters, and they were going to make sure that I did my share of the chores and that I didn't slack off. So they, my parents were great, but my sisters were the ones who were like, you're not getting away with this just because you can't see.
Oh,
When my sisters were mowing the lawn, I had to take a hand clippers and clip the weeds around the house manually.
oh,
It's so I was still doing some work. So yeah, I think it is important. But at the same time, as human beings, it's important to reach out and help too. If you see somebody's wheelchair tipped over, chances are they need help, and
yeah. Well, yeah,
so
that's very true. But I mean, that's funny that your sisters are the ones that pushed you to be like, no, you're gonna do your share.
yeah.
You're gonna do things just like we are gonna do things.
Yep.
There's no
Yeah,
special
totally.
treatment here. That's funny. That's I think that's the nice thing of having siblings is that you get that reality check. Like, no, you're normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
You go
You're
through
gonna
everything.
you're gonna carry your weight around here. So
That's
yeah.
true. That's a very valid point. And
Yeah.
I guess my question is, what is something that you hope people would understand from somebody who has a disability?
Um, I think that folks with disabilities aren't victims. I think in our culture right now, it's there's a lot of talk of that type, and I think people with disabilities are just people with challenges who are trying to get through life just like you, and thinking in that way may not be particularly helpful for them or us as a society.
Hmm, that's a very good point. Good point. So I'm curious. I have a quote here because I'm the quote queen. I love me my
Yeah.
quotes. So I'm gonna read you this quote and tell me what it makes you think about. So the
Mhm.
quote goes, disability is a matter of perception. If you can do just one thing well, you're needed by someone.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
Um, we're all looking for that thing we do or that someone. And I think that makes a heck of a lot of sense. Perception, just perception, I'm not sure. If you put me in a jungle with lions, I would probably get eaten. Well, tigers in a jungle, I guess. I'd get eaten first, probably because I wouldn't be able to evade. So there are, real limits on
Yeah.
folks with disabilities. So it's not all perception, but perception is huge. So
Yeah, that is a valid point because it's not just all perception because you can't just assume and force somebody with no legs and no extra equipment to be able to just run
yeah.
and just you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
doesn't work like you have to be realistic at the same point. Like, okay, they have limitations, respect their limitations, but also respect they can do also so much. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Look at so many Stephen Hawking's, he was
Oh yeah.
disabled. Yeah, he did
Yeah.
so much into the world.
Yeah.
So and you look, you've done so much into the world too. I mean, I would have never I would have felt so hard. Like, did you have to like when you went to medical school, like what was the obstacles for you that you had to deal with you being blind?
Uh, well, like the first course was anatomy, so that's where we
Oh,
dissect the human body, right? And and you have to identify, muscles, nerves, organs. So I did that all by touch. And I was the guy who reached into the chest and pulled out the lungs, and stuff like that. So that was, learning that was a challenge. And then, various things along the way, trying to figure out how to read an electrocardiogram, somebody's heart rhythm, and figuring out how to do the physical exam. All those things were challenges along the way.
Oh, well, I mean, you were able to overcome them, so it seems very very good. I mean, that's interesting. Well, that I think that's harder, because you have to learn in a different manner, by touch. So you have to feel things. You have to
Yep.
like categorize things and in your mind and just think and visual. Do you visualize things in your mind? I don't know how that works. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, I do. Sometimes I'll catch myself moving my hand in space, to sort of
uh,
give my brain a clue. I've been doing some research on this, and it turns out that the part of the brain, it's called the occipital cortex, that's usually involved in um, how sighted people interpret what they see, and blind folks can get used when they read Braille.
oh,
So the brain kind of, rearranges and takes over some functions. When folks with who are hard of hearing read lips, you can see the auditory cortex in their brain light up, and it's really fascinating. So when we always say, "Boy, I don't know how they would do that," well, people with disabilities have had the opportunity to acquire skills, to practice, and even, learn, and their brains may change in ways that make it possible.
that's true. That
Yeah,
is a very good point. Thank you for this. Thank
yeah,
you. That is
yeah,
that is a great point. So I'm curious just to get off of the topic of
yeah.
disability and more to know you as a person. What is your pet peeve in life?
Oh man. What's
Mm,
my what's my pet peeve?
yeah.
Uh and this intersects, of course, as it often does. I think authority or power without the requisite knowledge that somebody should have in a position of power or authority. So
Elaborate if you don't mind.
yeah, sure. So I was working at a university for several years, and as a physician, you sort of have the impression that what's right for patient care, et cetera. And then your superior, one or two steps up the chain, has been, working in college administration their whole career and have never touched a patient. And somehow they're making decisions on how our clinic runs. And so that
Mm.
that disconnection between the decision makers and knowledge really, really frustrates me.
Oh, absolutely. I've been in those positions as well where for some reason they got the job yet having no experience in the real world of working in it and it sucks because they don't have that understanding
Yeah.
versus when somebody actually goes through it or they have the experience interacting with clients and then you're just like, but why it works better if we do it this way, but they're all
Yeah.
numbers and logics and like, no, it's gonna work this way because I said so. And it's like,
Right.
well, that's frustrating. So yes, I can see how that's your pet peeve because it really is. It's a pet peeve of mine as well.
Right. And,
That's
and
fair.
and and that same attitude back in the day, was probably a barrier for me to get into the whole medical business, because they're like, well, how's this guy going to do it? And I'm in power. I can say no.
Yeah.
And so I think I carry some of that with me when I face those challenges today, and I try to own that. So
Good. Yeah, you should own it. I mean, I think
yeah,
anybody with a disability should own it because until you say it's enough, nobody in this world has the right to say it's enough for you. Until you say you have that voice, that choice to speak up and say that, I believe.
yeah. So
Yeah. So, what is a fun fact about you?
let's see. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So I've started my own podcast.
Yay.
Yeah, with a buddy. So this I think this is cool. So this is a friend of mine of 30 years. We met in college, and we don't agree on much. So our
That's always the
podcast
best.
it is the best. So our podcast is called Bald. He's bald, blind and buddies. So bald, blind and buddies. And so we just talk about issues, and our idea is to model dialogue, because we're really polarized now, and model dialogue between people who don't always agree, and maintaining a friendship. And so that's something I'm really excited about these days.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
exciting because
Yeah.
it gives you something else to think about, something else to do. And I think more people need to realize that you can disagree or see things differently or have a different perspective in life or of an understanding. But it's just about respecting the fact that you think the way that you think, I think the way that I think, but it doesn't take a fact that I still like you as a human being.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And what we're doing periodically is checking in on the podcast and talking about what we've learned from the other person in the past interview. So or interval. So we're like, oh, your thoughts on this really changed my mind. And so we're also trying to model growth and learning in the process. So it's a lot of fun.
That's good. Yeah, there's always room to grow. There's always room to
Yeah.
evolve. Yeah. So, what's your medicine then? What's your way to zen down and relax and just Timothy time?
I read a lot. I've been, with the podcast, I've been learning how to edit audio. So
Hmm.
I've been doing that. And I also I play piano and keyboards. I've, from time to time, and that's just fun to sit down and, bang out a tune or two.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
I can most definitely see that.
Yeah.
So, if you could tell your younger self anything in the world, what would you tell your younger self?
Oh my goodness.
Another thinker.
Yeah. I would probably say it's going to be worth it.
Hmm.
Because there was a lot of, there's a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of, challenges. And I think telling that younger self that, you know, you you can get there, would be, would be useful. And I also would probably tell my younger self to, take the long view. You don't have to fight every fight, but you should try to win the war. So
Hmm. That is interesting. That is interesting. I think that's a very good point because I don't think people actually acknowledge the fact that, you have to just take the long way sometimes or take the long view and just
yeah.
walk it instead of run it,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I like that. So I really did enjoy my time with you. I know time's running up for us.
Yep.
So I thank you for coming on my show. And I
You
just want to
bet.
know what's some lasting words of wisdom that you can leave us off with?
Don't be afraid to try, to fail, and to try again, because that's how we've gotten pretty much everywhere as human beings so far.
Right? We might as well keep on going then.
Yeah.
Try.
Yeah.
Don't, don't forget, don't be scared to try and fail.
And
Just
then
try
try again, and then try again. That's the
and
key.
keep going again and again
Yeah.
and again and just learn from it and evolve. Yeah, I think
Yep.
that growth part that you were talking
Hmm.
about earlier about just evaluating and just replaying and just thinking about what's been said or just what's going on. Those are really great points as well. I mean,
Yeah.
to be honest, you said a lot of great points in this conversation. So I really do thank you
Thank
for
you.
this. And if
Thank you.
anybody wants to know more about Timothy, I have his picture on my website. You can find all the access to what he has to offer in the world. Follow him on socials. Check out his podcast. Because why wouldn't you want to hear that and surely make you think about life? Because that's the whole point, is just to think about it. So, with
Yeah.
that being said,